And I am continuing with the sexual ethics policy for the Texas Annual Conference Administration for the United Methodist Denomination in Houston, Texas. And today I am on page 12 of the sexual ethics policy. And the reason why I am doing this series covering the sexual ethics policy is because I am a survivor of sexual assault, and I'm a survivor of sexual assault by United Methodist clergy who was my father, John Chester Dowden, who was at one time, when he was alive, employed by the Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Denomination in Houston, Texas. I was also forced to visit my sons at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church through supervised visitation, and I was also sexually harassed in front of my sons at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church because clearly the the Texas Annual Conference United Methodist Administration is into that type of thing, and I just do not have that in common with them. So here we go. Maintaining an up-to-date list of persons who have pastoral relationships in the church records. Oh, I can guarantee you that this does not happen. Requiring that all new activities that involve pastoral relationships be approved by the pastor and the chair of the Pastor Parish Relations Committee. I think that's what that is. Before the activity is to begin, requests to develop new activities or programs should be submitted in writing. This does not always happen. Like I said, these policies are basically ink on paper. Spiritual counseling. This is going to get interesting because I'm also going to talk about mental health. There are laws that prohibit sexual exploitation between mental health care providers and those to whom they are providing those services. So let's talk about that. I had to visit my sons at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church that was under the Texas Annual Conference Administration that employed my father, John Chester Dowden, who sexually abused me. I was also followed to the restroom. I was exploited at St. Stephen's United Methodist Church in front of my sons. I can understand how the Texas Annual Conference felt that I deserved that since I was sexually assaulted by my father, John Chester Dowden, who was employed under them. And I was also sexually harassed in front of my sons. I also consulted with an attorney named Harrison Fisher, who told me basically that the Texas Annual Conference would retaliate against me. And this is why I have so many content ideas for social media. Great job on that, by the way, Texas Annual Conference. And so when Harrison Fisher gave me my paperwork back, he leaked a document revealing the identity of Jane Doe, who is Alicia Provost Whitfield, who is a sexual assault survivor of Kendall Graham, who was employed under the Texas Annual Conference Administration. And Harrison Fisher wrote a letter to Bishop Huey in 2011. I experienced retaliation because I exposed the fact that I am a sexual assault survivor, because the Texas Annual Conference likes their sexual assault victims compliant and silent. And I am not that by any means. And I experienced retaliation because Harrison Fisher, who was required to provide client confidentiality for Alicia Provost Whitfield and failed to do that. I experienced retaliation from Harrison Fisher and also from the Texas Annual Conference for exposing that. And I can see how they feel that I deserved the retaliation that I went through, and my sons were affected. And I can see how they feel that my sons deserved that retaliation, even though they did not, because they were born into this. They didn't ask to be affected by this, but I understand that the Texas Annual Conference does not care about the victims of sexual assault by their clergy and does not care if those victims are further exploited within the United Methodist denomination under the Texas Annual Conference administration in Houston, Texas. So, a copy of the Texas Statute, Chapter 81 of the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code is provided in the appendix. Clergy are included within the definition of mental health provider unless the services they provide cover only spiritual counseling. For this reason, it is important to follow these guidelines. I can tell you from my own personal experience, there are many clergy who cannot even handle their own mental health issues clearly, who may agree to a baptism and bail on you and attack your mental health, because I'm not quite sure what my mental health had to do with baptizing my sons. But anyway, and clergy overstepped this boundary because there was a United Methodist minister who assisted me in Tyler. I was dealing with my parents putting pressure on me because they were struggling. And apparently it was my job to provide for them and wait on their fat, worthless asses and cater to them. And I was working in the church nursery. I was actually working 3 jobs. I was burning the candle at both ends. And I actually went to high school with his daughter, but I did not see her much. She really didn't have much to do with me. She would barely acknowledge me, certainly not in front of her friends in high school. But somehow he felt that he was an expert on my mental health, which is interesting because I was not around him much. I was upset, clearly, because I was in an abusive environment, but I don't think the Texas Annual Conference really thinks that's a valid reason to be upset. And what he said to me was he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. I wish I was bipolar, by the way. I really do. Sometimes I feel like my life would be easier because, I understand it's completely irrelevant that I already have other health issues, because those are not relevant. If someone decides they want to put another health issue into my life, I have Hashimoto's and I deal with low energy. I've been struggling with low iron. And to be quite honest, I have actually felt at times I wish that I were schizophrenic or had schizoaffective disorder, or that I were bipolar, because, one of those, I could be so drugged that I wouldn't know what was going on, which at times has not sounded like a bad idea, but I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I prefer to be present in the moment. And I am not one to be manic. I don't have the energy to be bipolar. And he said he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder because I guess he felt that he had a medical degree in armchair psychiatry maybe by the Texas Annual Conference administration. I'm not really sure. I can confidently say he was really not around me enough to diagnose me, and certainly was not qualified to diagnose me. He actually helped me with my rent because I was struggling. And, I guess since, he diagnosed me with bipolar disorder, I have just been too mentally ill to pay him back. So, which also brings up another realization I've had, which is that there were multiple clergy who felt that they were experts on mental health. Now, I know of one clergy specifically who went through clinical training at Russ State Hospital with my father before either of them were ever employed at the Texas Annual Conference. In fact, he used to be the senior pastor at Bering Memorial United Methodist Church before they separated from the conference. And I have to be very specific in details because I understand people within the conference administration would like to talk to me like I'm stupid or mentally ill, because that's clearly been my experience, especially since they are experts on mental health after employing child molesters and placing them on assignment in their churches. Anyway, but it was never my experience. He never tried to diagnose me or psychoanalyze me. And the reason is because he knew it wasn't his place as a clergy. He understood psychiatric disorders. He understood mental health and psychiatric treatment because he had worked at Russ State Hospital. But he was not one to diagnose someone because he knew he was not qualified. And clergy who have wanted to make assumptions about my mental health, clearly what that tells me is that a lot of people think that if someone is mentally ill, that it doesn't matter if they were abused in some type of way or violated or exploited. They're too mentally ill to know what's going on. And that is not true. Mental illness should never discredit anybody. And since Harrison Fisher stated to me that the Texas Annual Conference would say that I was too mentally ill to take care of our sons, and now they're with a man who was capable of putting his hands around our son's neck and dragged him 5 feet across the carpet. And now one son wants the other son to die a slow and painful death and is not receiving psychiatric treatment. And considering the fact that they have not met him, and there are not too many people who worked in the conference administration that saw me around my sons, that tells me that they clearly do not take abuse allegations seriously and just chalk it up to they're just mentally ill. It just doesn't matter. They are discredited, and mental illness should never discredit someone from sharing their story if they were abused. It does not mean that they did not know what was going on. The body keeps score. Even if you are an infant, the body keeps score, and the spirit knows. Clergy and Clergy and others in pastoral relationships should not go outside their area of expertise and training. Well, isn't that interesting? It's a shame that there are clergy that do not follow this policy, but instead should make a referral to a physician, psychologist, or mental health professional for issues that involve those specialties. And quite frankly, if the Texas Annual Conference really did make a statement about my mental health, they were out of line. In fact, they were going against these very policies that I'm reading. They were out of bounds because the Texas Annual Conference administration, their role is not to psychoanalyze someone or provide psychiatric treatment. Their role as an administration is to protect the people of the church and the clergy and protect the victims of abuse perpetrated by their clergy, which they do not do. Even clergy who are licensed or credentialed as mental health care professionals, such as psychologists, marriage or family therapists, and substance abuse counselors, must draw distinctions when they are functioning on behalf of the church. And this is not done. This is not done in the conference administration, especially if you have been abused by a clergy, because what they will do is come after your mental health, which is interesting because anyone who is abused, their mental health is affected. I have a mental health diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is not something you're born with. This is not a genetic psychiatric disorder. This is a disorder that is caused by trauma. In fact, I have complex PTSD, not just PTSD. And the C is not just an extra letter. It is because I have been repeatedly exposed to trauma. My trauma, the abuse that my parents put me through, other people's trauma. Okay. And make it clear to those they are serving that they are not functioning on the role of a mental health care provider when working on behalf of the church, but only as a spiritual advisor. And let me tell you, when the damage is done spiritually, they do not help mend that relationship either. They would prefer that the victims just disappear. They have no interest in assisting the victim of repairing their relationship with the church or rebuilding their trust with them. They would prefer that they just go away and disappear. And if you speak out, you will be retaliated against. Clergy who are licensed and do provide services as mental health care providers while also serving as spiritual advisors on behalf of the church should clearly separate those roles by maintaining separate offices or locations and clearly communicate to all concerned when they are acting as a mental health care provider as opposed to a spiritual advisor or spiritual counselor. Clergy who are separately licensed or credentialed as mental health care providers must maintain in full force separate professional insurance coverage at all times for any work they do outside their church role as spiritual advisors, and provide proof of insurance to the church on an annual basis. I would never, ever consult regarding a mental health issue, especially trauma or religious trauma, with anyone who is employed in a leadership role of a church. The insurance must have per occurrence limits of at least $1 million and aggregate limits of at least $3 million, including coverage for sexual misconduct. However, defined in the policies with limits of at least $50,000. The insurance policy must name the church employer or church as an additional insured. So, the Texas Annual Conference does have insurance policies for sexual abuse. They have multiple insurance policies. They are very wealthy. They own a lot of land, and they have influence locally, and in some cases, nationally. There are political figures who have been involved with leaders in the government. Even a Methodist minister who was employed under the Texas Annual Conference was also a spiritual advisor for 2 presidents. The Texas Annual Conference has the capability to assist a person who has been traumatized and abused. However, the majority of the time, they would prefer to sweep it under the rug. And they would prefer that the victim just go away. And if this person speaks out, they will retaliate. I know this because it has happened to me multiple times. Another policy that I brought up, or information I brought up on Google, while United Methodist clergy play a significant role in providing pastoral care and spiritual support, they are generally not trained or licensed to provide clinical mental health treatment, which typically involves diagnosing and treating mental health disorders. Here's why and what their role entails. Pastoral counseling focuses on spiritual and emotional support. However, if you have been sexually abused by one of their clergy, there is no support for you. And if you speak out, you will experience retaliation. Clergy offer guidance based on religious principles, scripture, theological understanding. They can provide comfort, address spiritual struggles, and help individuals explore their faith during challenging times. I shared the story of a United Methodist minister who had agreed to come all the way from Arkansas to baptize my sons. And That was an unhealthy relationship. I never should have reconnected with her. But I was still dealing with my trauma. And when we go through trauma in life, it tends to bring up trauma, past trauma that we have not addressed yet. And I have a son who has been hospitalized 7 times, and he has a triple diagnosis. And this pastor that agreed to baptize our sons, my sons, she does not have any children of her own. And if you've never had kids, there is no possible way that you can comprehend the love that a mother has for her child. And she knew that my ex-husband was abusive and that he had been reported for physical abuse. He was lying and was saying that our son was doing great when he was not. If you have been reported to CPS for dragging our son 5 feet across the carpet and you physically injure him because you physically abused him, and you do not seek medical treatment, things are not okay. Why would I know this? Oh, gee, I don't know. Maybe because I grew up in a highly abusive environment within the Texas Conference and within my own home with my parents who abused myself and other children. Oh, but I'm sure that's my fault too, right? Because I am responsible for what my parents did, because that is exactly the way you were treated within the Texas Annual Conference. You are nothing more than damaged goods to them. So, the last night I spoke with her, she decided to side with my ex and say, oh, well, aren't you happy? He says he's doing great. When I knew, I was married to the man for 7 years. I've provided recorded conversations all over the internet. And, he thinks that a woman who would drug her own daughter so that her husband can sexually assault her is wonderful around our sons. I don't know, but I don't think that's okay. Maybe the Texas Annual Conference thinks that's okay. And I don't know if this pastor shared the same opinion with the rest of the United Methodist inside of the conference and outside of the conference. However, she accused me of not wanting my son to do well. Taking my son to a psychiatric unit at the age of 5 was one of the hardest decisions I have ever had to make. And I spoke with 2 clergy that day on the phone, her and another clergy. And in fact, Mary Tumulty was the one I spoke with. She met with me with the bishop. And Alex, my son, attacked Mary. And I stopped it. Because when someone would speak to Alex, it was a trigger for him. So he would start pinching their arm. And he started doing this to Mary. I was mortified and I stopped it. I had been working with him and I told him that if anyone speaks to you and you don't like it, if they extend their hand out to shake, you just put your hand up and you say, no, thank you. And that's not what happened. He attacked her. And I stopped him. And I was emotional that day. So she witnessed what was going on with my son firsthand. And this clergy that had agreed to come and baptize my sons had the audacity to accuse me of not wanting my child to do well. Well, let me tell you, He was 9 pounds when he was born. She did not give birth to him. She did not get up with him for 6 months to feed him in the middle of the night. She did not go through the depression. She did not have to stand up to my parents so that I could protect my son. She was out of line because as a clergy who had agreed to baptize my sons, it was not her place to judge me as a parent, especially since she did not have any children of her own and did not want children of her own. Because if you don't want kids, then you have no place to judge any parent or any decisions that they have to make. She also was not there when my youngest son almost died of pyloric stenosis. She was not the one who lost sleep for 4 weeks because he was constantly vomiting. I was covered in vomit. She was not the one who had to sit there in the ER while they squeezed his little arm because it had too much fluid from an IV. They had to do his IV several times that night, and that night he almost died. She was not there for that. And now his brother wants him to die a slow and painful death. So that night, when she accused me of not wanting my son to do well, I got angry and I got defensive, which she did not like because she did not like it when I stood my ground with her. So what she did was she attacked my character, which was wrong. And she said, you need help. You need serious help. And this is coming from somebody who has a diagnosis of PTSD. This is coming from somebody who has a diagnosis of depression. And here she is attacking my own mental health, and she hasn't experienced the trauma I've experienced. I didn't experience the trauma she has experienced. So it certainly wasn't my place to make assumptions. And it was never my place to attack her mental health, of which I did not do. Even when she was telling me about how she was falling apart at church after meetings and sobbing and telling people, I'm so disappointed. I'm so sorry I disappointed you. I'm a failure, blah, blah, blah. Then you know what? If you're a clergy, get your mental health in check before you want to attack somebody else's, especially a mother who's been through her own trauma and watched her son almost die. It is way too often that these clergy cross boundaries because they have a sense of entitlement. They are given more leeway than what they should have simply because they're clergy. And it's really just a job. They are nobody special. Even if they think they are not. And the Texas Annual Conference, they are as moral as the abusive clergy that they employ. And they are not better than the victims whose lives are permanently affected from the abuse that they have to go through. I have been doing social media for a while, and It took time for me to get comfortable in front of the camera. I am introverted. I keep to myself because of the trauma that I have experienced. I don't like to be around many people. And about the only person I trust anymore is my husband. And it is a miracle that we came into each other's lives. And I have no idea if it was a divine intervention. I don't really care. I do this content because, well, one, because the Texas Annual Conference, the last thing they want is a survivor of sexual assault talking about their policies and giving their opinion. And my views aren't the best views, and I understand that what I am discussing is not that fascinating. It is not interesting at all. It is the culture I grew up in. I know that if anything, people who are in churches, anyone who is deconstructing and recovering from spiritual abuse and sexual abuse within a Christian community, this might help them. I also know that I am holding the Texas Annual Conference accountable, that they did not succeed in silencing me, and my sons will see this content when they are older. Their father is irresponsible and probably shows them now. My content is not for kids. And I don't do this for views. I don't do this for validation because I could care less about either one. I don't care about that. I do this for myself. I do it because I want the Texas Annual Conference to see my face talking about their policies and the lack of ethics within their administration and how my life has been affected. Anytime they Google sexual ethics policy or the Texas Annual Conference. I have also called out other bishops because Bishop Easterling has spoke of her experience being a survivor of domestic violence. I have tagged her. I have reached out to Bishop Bob Farr because I came across years ago a sermon where he was talking about my great uncle who was a district superintendent in the Missouri conference, Ross Fulton Sr. And I grew up around the Fultons. Marie Fulton, her maiden name is Marie Hassel. She is also related to Judge Morris Hassel in Cherokee County. She's more closely related to him than she was more closely related to him when they were alive than I am related to him because she's was older. And so I grew up around the Hassel family, and the Fultons would come for the Hassel family reunion. And Ross Fulton Sr. was a wonderful man, and so is his son, Ross Fulton Jr. They're good people. And I spoke with Ross Fulton Jr. years ago and shared with him my story. Ross Fulton Jr. actually went to seminary with clergy who are retired now, like I think Falk Landrum, Clifford Lee, who passed away years ago. He also went to seminary with Bishop Huey. I did not know this at the time that I met with her. I don't know that it would have mattered. By that time, I was still dealing with too much trauma to process my extended family's involvement in the United Methodist denomination. I can also say that growing up around Ross Fulton Sr., it was quite obvious that they were a part of the United Methodist denomination. They were more educated than the rest of the Hassel family. The Hassel family are poor folks. They're very plain spoken. They're very loving, but they tell it like it is, which is why I am so outspoken on here, because I was raised around the Hassel family. And I can understand why Judge Morris Hassel did not really have a close relationship with the Hassels that I was raised around, because I know the stories. I know the stories of domestic violence and alcoholism that went on within the Hassel family and the dysfunction. And Judge Hassel and Ross Fulton Jr. had very different lives. They did not grow up around the Hassel family as much as I did. And it was always a pleasure to see Ross Fulton Sr. and Ross Fulton Jr. and their girls. Their girls are younger than myself. And it did mean a lot to speak with Ross Fulton Jr. years ago and share my story with him, because he understood how I was raised, because he was raised in the United Methodist environment as well, but he had a very different story. And his was not traumatic. He did not have abusive parents like I did. I don't know why I had to go through what I went through, but it has shaped who I am today. I also have very good boundaries around children. After losing custody, I really have no interest in being around kids. I don't mind being around my own, but since I can't see my kids, because I exposed sexual harassment from a I experienced in a United Methodist Church visiting my kids, I was kicked out, and I am not allowed to see my kids because I exposed sexual harassment, and I also exposed the involvement with the Domestic Relations Office and the Texas Conference, and why that is a contradiction and should not be taking place, because the Texas Annual Conference has a history of employing child molesters, and they cannot say they are assisting the Domestic Relations Office in protecting children if they are letting them use their churches when they have a history of employing clergy who have been responsible for sexually abusing children, one of them being my father. And so I have been very outspoken about that. And that is all I have